Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be at. Welcome to TAM Lab number 39. Today, we're super excited to have Sonny Nguyen joining us, and he's going to be showing us how to leverage the vSphere REST API, which I feel like is a very powerful skill set to have in your toolkit, right? Because there's a lot of things you can do from an automation perspective when you talk about leveraging APIs, especially with vSphere. So super excited to see what Sonny's got for us today. And that is all I've got for PowerPoint. So I'm going to hand it over to Sonny at this point, and feel free to take it away.
Sure. Hey guys, my name is Sonny. First off, Steve, thanks for letting me present, and everyone else that's on, thank you for having me, because I hope this is educational. So first, what I'm going to show you guys is my vCenter, right? And then I'm going to go a little bit deeper into REST API. So when I first started with REST API, everyone around me tells me that it's so complicated, so programming that you won't like it. And when I talk to other colleagues within VMware, I hear the same exact thing. So I'm hoping by the end of this, you guys will see it that it's not really that complicated. Keep in mind, for this presentation, I am not going to show you any slides at the same time. I'm not going to show you every ins and outs of every REST API calls to vCenter, but you should have enough to start with and then grow, okay? So first and foremost, REST API, let me show you an example, for example, right? And then I'll go deeper into this. But at the end of the day, there's two things that you need to know about. First things first is it's either a get or a push, okay? So it's always, hey, I want something, or I want to make changes to something. And that's how it works with the vCenter environment that we have now. If we're talking about info block, if we're talking about F5, if we're talking about anything else that's running REST API, there are other commands as well, right? That there's also a put, there's also a few other options. But for the sake of this conversation, it's mostly get and post, okay? The second piece is the path. So at the end of the day, what happens is you ask for something and then you tell the path. The server then will give you back output, okay? And in a little bit, I'll show you what the outputs look like, right? But just recall that as you go down the line, doesn't work for vCenter, but for F5 and Infoblock. If you were to give it a command for a path, it'll send you back outputs of other paths that you can traverse into. And as you get deeper and deeper, then it'll give you variations of get and post. That way you can actually get the information, make the changes. Get the information, make the changes. Any questions so far? Okay. The other thing is usually there's a -u for username, and you put in the username and password. For VMware, you can't really do that. So everything is all token based. Once you figure out what I'm doing here, you guys will pick it up and go as well, okay? And then lastly, I use this curl command, okay? Here's the deal. There's GUIs to accessing REST APIs. There's apps accessing REST API. But at the end of the day, if you just want to be able to get into vCenter and get stuff, you don't need anything, overly complicated. A curl command, which could be downloaded on the web, for Windows or Linux, and go from there. Keep in mind, if you are PowerShell savvy, you can actually invoke web or invoke REST as well, and more or less same kind of commands, okay? So as you can see, I've got a vCenter with a few data centers, with a few ESXs and a few VMs, okay? From here, if I were to show you, so let me clear this out. To access the environment, right? As you can see, here's the IP address. For vCenter, it needs this specific path, okay? And all I do is I post a request in saying, hey, here's my username, okay? And what that does is it's gonna ask you for the password because I don't put anything out in the clear. If you type in the right password, this will come back, value equals, and this is the token, okay? If you do it wrong, it's gonna spew out something like incorrect password or no access, okay? So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna add this token in. And what that does for me, now if I were to look for it, look for every VM in the environment, it spits out information, okay? One thing, it's always open bracket, close bracket, and then a whole bunch of stuff in between. Now, when you guys first look at this looks overly complicated. As you guys get more and more comfortable, it's actually easier to read. So here's the trick that I do. So if you were to take a look at this command versus the initial command, I don't think I showed you the initial command, did I? So here's the initial command, right, of get VM. It's still curl, it's a get, given the token, and then I ask for the path, and then it spews out that information. Now, if you take a look at my third script, it's the same command, as you can see. The only difference is I send it over to Python, and then I send it to a JSON format. And what that does is, if you run it, it gives you a more legible text, okay? The great thing about this is it gives you more information than you would if you were to take a look at the vCenter, right? It gives you the real VM, not what you see, but actually what vCenter knows. Here's the thing about this. It is very format oriented. So what I mean by that is the output comes out perfectly. If you were to put data in, it has to be perfect as well, okay? So if there's an extra space, if there's an extra tab, it screws up with REST API. With that being said, as long as you guys know that up front, it makes it easier to work with. Any questions so far?
I have one, Sonny. Can you go to vCenter in the background there? Is this 6? I think they introduced it with 6.5. I know it's in 6.7, but if you go up to menu and then Developer Center, is that in there? Yeah. There's the API Explorer in there. So have you been using that to help kind of figure out where to go as far as the path and all that?
So actually, so that's what I was going to show at the end. Not only that, but also, so what I want to get people to be comfortable with, and you're absolutely right. What I want people to be comfortable with and demystifying is that you can go through this, but at the same time, if you have nothing other than a command line, I want everyone to be comfortable of just running a few lines and then getting there. But back to what you mentioned, yes, this is very valuable, and it gives you a lot more details of what you can do within these paces.
Awesome.
All right? Yeah. I didn't want to give anyone too much of an easy path in, because then what happens is they get stuck in the GUI and they lose sight of the actual codes themselves, if that makes sense. All right. Anyone else have any questions? Okay, so I've showed you guys the VM. I've showed you guys how clean it is to display. If you want to take a look at all the data center in the environment, as you can see, it spits that out as well. Same kind of trick, right? Nothing special here. Likewise, if you were to take a look at the host, you can see all the hosts, see what's connected, what's not connected, right? All the IP addresses, the names, everything. And then lastly, I mean, I'm just giving you guys a few examples, but there's so much more that you can look through, okay? If you're a little bit savvy, you can actually start doing sequential searches to find out, for example, what variations you want to look at, if it's VMFS, if it's NFS, stuff like that. But what I'm showing you guys, oh, I forgot. sorry. What I'm showing you guys here, oops, let me dismiss that. Is exactly what I said before. It all comes down to the path. As long as you have the right token and you have the right path, vCenter will respond back with everything you need to know. Okay, so here's the host. Okay, and then lastly, did I also show you the data center? So what I'm trying to do, guys, is and gals, of course, is to try to make it simple for you guys to just latch onto. Okay. If and I've done this before with other people where I try to show the advanced configurations of REST API, and either people stop following me or it just makes it harder to understand. This is just basic. And what we'll do is we'll make this available so you guys can actually run this for yourselves. So you guys can see your own output, and it makes it easier. Okay. So everything that I've shown you guys already is mostly the gets, right? To get access to the vCenters, to ESX, to the VMs. The only thing that I've shown you guys post is actually the login, because I needed a real output. Okay. So here, let's see, for example, now that I've showed you guys all the basics of, the infrastructure, let me show you the basics of a particular VM. So if I were to cat out this, earlier on, I said, no, not number 3. I made a listing of every machine that's available, right? VM. And then if you take a look in this command, I'm still asking for it. I still have the token because we're still constantly talking to the vCenter, and I want this particular VM, right? This one right here. By running that command, it gives me a lot more variable, a lot more information from, let's see, you got the CD-ROM, you've got the boot process, how much CPU, how much disk space, what they are, what the name of it is, right? And every variable that you would see had you right-click and edit settings. Okay. Now, what this means is that, if you need to know every VM and every variable and you're looking for a specific configurations, you can get that. Okay. And I've got friends who I've shown this to, and they said, well, I could do the same exact thing with PowerShell. And my answer is you can. The only difference is if you're on a Linux box that you'd install PowerShell or PowerCLI to, you won't be able to have that access. So this is literally a universal way of accessing vCenter from any environment. It doesn't matter if it's, for example, you're seeing me do this through my Mac, but it could be the Linux box, it could be a Windows box. All right. So here's something that so I've shown you guys how to read the data from vCenter. Let's start changing stuff within vCenter, right? So if you take a look at this, this is turning on a VM, all right? Now that I want it to do something, instead of a get, I post it to the path, to that particular VM, that path. And as Steve has mentioned, if you go through the developer section, it'll show you all the path and all the variables that you can do with it. All right. For this particular post, it's fairly simple. It's post an entry here and it's good. For certain configurations, you have to actually post a whole entire slew of information. I won't be showing you that here in this presentation, but I'm hoping that as you guys see this, that makes it easier for you guys to understand what you can do for the variables and stuff like that. All right. So if I were to run that one, right, what you're going to see is that the VM starts turning on. All right. Likewise, now if I were to do a get VM, right, you'll see all the boxes that are still off, and you see that one will that's actually on. Okay, so all the commands that I've given you guys so far, You can use it over and over again as you're making changes to the environment. Any question? Okay. If you do, don't hesitate to ask. Likewise, if later on when you review this and or things start settling in and you have questions, feel free to reach out to Steve and myself, and we'll respond back. Okay. So on the flip side, I've showed you guys how to turn it on. Let me show you how to turn it off. Same exact thing. Post, and instead of start, it's stop. And these aren't arbitrary commands. These are variables and configs that the developers have already put into vCenter. Okay, so we can't put a restart, or we can't put a pause. We can't, unless it's already programmed in. So what you're seeing here within vCenter is what is made available. When you're doing REST API for any other environments, you're gonna have to pay attention to what can be done and what can't be done. Okay. So if I do that, you'll notice that it shunts off right away. All right.
Is there also a shutdown as opposed to stop, like a graceful shutdown?
That's a good question. That I don't know. I haven't looked into that yet, but that's something we can always check out. But you're right. You're right.
Yeah, I'll check on my side.
Okay.
I'll pull it up. See if I can figure it out.
Okay. One more thing I want to show you guys is, so I've shown you how to turn stuff off, turn stuff on. Deleting is the same trick as well. So if I were to show you 10, okay. You know how I said earlier on that there's a get in a post? Well, actually for vCenter, and you won't see this elsewhere, but there's actually a delete as well. All right, so delete the path. And for this time, I put VM 871. So 871 is actually test04, that guy right there. All right. So if you take a look at that, and then I run this command, it deletes it right away. All right. How we're looking, guys? Did you guys still following along, or?
I have a question.
Sure.
The 871, right? VM-871. Is there a way to find that from the GUI that you're aware of? Is it like in the VMX file maybe, or something like that?
It is in the VMX file. In the GUI, I don't recall ever seeing it.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of those variables that's just built in there.
Right.
And I'm sure any one of you guys who have run commands to check VMs in PowerShell will see these numbers as well, because that is the idea of the VM itself. Right. So other than that, Steve has mentioned earlier about the development center, right? The way I saw it earlier on was actually, if we were to go through, if you were to just go straight to here, there's a section right over here for REST API. Okay, and it'll give you every variable that's available. And then, and if you're uncomfortable with the command line, this is where I would recommend you go. Reason being is because by doing this, for example, you can go to data center, right? And you can go to here. And what that does is it not only tells you a little bit more of what's going on, but it also gives you the actual path, the actual variables. And all you do is you plug and play. And once you do, you go down, you do try out, right? And it will actually run that command and then give you an output as well. So it'll give you the variable, the command that you would normally do, like me, in the command line. And then it will give you the result. As you can see, because I haven't logged in, the generic result coming back is you know, it's unauthenticated, so therefore I'm not giving you any information. All right. What do you guys think?
think I found the shutdown. It's yours was stop.
Start and stop. Yep.
Mine, or I guess shutdown gracefully, is just shutdown. So it's kind of what you would expect, but I think I found it.
Okay, good. The reasons why I'm showing you guys this GUI, right, is not only can you manipulate every entry within vCenter, what's cool here is that it gives you other variables as well. For example, if you want to access and configure the appliance, here's a whole bunch of them to control the vCenter appliance itself. All right. Likewise, there's a few other variables here as well.
Hey, Sonny, how did you get there again?
So right over here, if you were to go straight to the vCenter, and then there's
so it's the vCenter IP. That's what I didn't grasp. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
Now, Steve and others, I do recall that the REST API's GUI is starting to land in other places as well, right? Like for example, I thought I saw it in VROPS and a few others.
Yeah, it's definitely in VROPS.
Yeah, which is kind of nice because now you guys get a chance to understand how developers are looking at this. So just that's more or less most of my presentation. But what I'm trying to get at here is I want you all to be comfortable with the REST API, because what you can do afterwards with that is so much more. Now, that's as a person tinkering. As a person who is just trying to understand how the environment works, as I said before, how I'm showing you guys to access vCenter is the same kind of trick that you would access Infoblock and F5 and any other device or application that is open to REST API. What that also means, of course, is if you've ever worked with VRO, you now know a way of accessing all of the configurations, right? Which then, if you take it to the next level of VRA, which means that you can actually make any product talk to any product, whether it's a VMware product or not, and integrate all that together. Now, with that kind of understanding, when you talk to your customers and they're confused about certain stuff, especially if they're confused on how to integrate VRO, VRA with any of their configurations with vSphere, you at least can give them a hint on where to go from there. All right.
So have you done much with your customers regarding API stuff?
So I'm starting to work with my customer. I only have one. I'm starting to work with them to get them to understand. And what I did was I actually did the REST API to talk to iDRAC, cover that up with PowerShell, and then insert that into VRO. And the reasons, so most folks, when I mention that, they would say, well, you could just do VRO with REST API and call it a day. That is true. The only difference is I'm talking to a bunch of folks who aren't programmers, who aren't, PowerShell savvy or VRO savvy. So what I've done was I created a building block for them to understand. And as they, move up from PowerShell to VRO, it's easy for them to adapt and easier for them to manipulate. Okay. Before this, I've only been with the TAM organization for a small amount of time. Before this, I was actually outside at another company that I was running the VRO, and I was integrating with everything. Everything being, let's see, I integrated with Jira. I integrated with a few others. NetApp. I started doing the EMC stuff. I started doing the ServiceNow configuration. I even showed upper management how to connect into AWS through VRA. Okay, all of this done through REST API. There were certain things that I could do with PowerShell. There's certain things I can do with shell scripting. But at the end of the day, the universal language is REST API. It made it easier for me to integrate a lot of the stuff. Steve, I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just kind of wrap my head around some common use cases that might make sense. Like things you do in vSphere constantly that it might just make sense to either use PowerCLI or directly through the API like you're showing here, or even just like tasks where you would build out a specific data center or like spin up a brand new cluster, right, where you configure the host, you want to put the networking the same, maybe you're not using VDS or something like that, right, where you want to do it consistently, repeatable, right, over and over, and make sure it's the same every time.
Correct. So for that aspect, you can use the REST API to do that. Ultimately, it just depends on how comfortable you are with REST API and PowerShell. Sometimes I find that PowerShell is much faster. For REST API, it's usually when I want to integrate infrastructures or applications that I don't have access via PowerShell. Because at the end of the day, it requires a little bit more work, but it's the same kind of command, same kind of configurations when I move it back and forth. Okay. Now, will you guys use this for your day-to-day activity? Probably not, but at least now you have a chance to understand a little bit more of it. And I hope that later on I can show you guys other things as well.
Have you used other utilities like you mentioned earlier around like kind of more of a graphical access into the API like Postman? I've used that one before.
Yeah,
do you have any other?
Well.
Yeah.
I have, but to be honest with you, I find that sometimes very similar to the GUI here is that I would fall into a rat's nest where I'll look into all the GUI and then I lose track of what I want to do.
Well, and can I chime in real quick on that one?
Sure.
I think what's interesting, right, with Postman, it's accessible, right, for people that don't feel comfortable on the command line. I think Firefox also has an option built into the developer tools. What I find is when I show people Postman, they get caught up in all of the different fields that you can fill in. And so in Sonny's example on the scripts, where you're putting content type equals application/JSON and things of that nature, people assume that you have to fill in all the blanks and they kind of get lost. Cool. So it's totally attainable. It's there. You can go download it. In fact, it's actually in a lot of our hands-on labs. If you log in, you can actually find Postman there, which is fantastic. But I think what we've seen here today is the most basic way of interacting with REST APIs. And Sonny, to your point, it's not just vSphere that's doing this, and it's all these other infrastructure vendors out there. Heck, XKCD, right? The comic has a REST API, right? Like you can actually go out. In fact, I'll post it in the chat if anybody wants to check it out. It's kind of goofy. Let's see here. I'll throw it in. There we go. So if you were to load that up, Sonny, you can show everybody what it looks like. There you go. So even something goofy like this website, right? You can click that top link. You can put that into curl or Postman or something else, and it'll actually return the JSON like we just saw, and let you do something with it. Where I see, and Steve, this is kind of a comment to what you're getting at earlier, is like, what do you do with this? What's the use case and whatever else? I find that people that use the command line start understanding, how can I chain one REST call to the next? Right? Like, okay, I want to find these VMs. Okay, great. Then I want to parse that and get that VM name out. And then I want to do another thing that deletes the VM. Like, you can kind of conceptualize what we just saw with Sonny's scripts. With Postman and other utilities, that's a bit harder. It's more focused, to me, my take is in little bite-sized chunks. Lets you iterate through a script. But having them in the command line and going that route lets you chain things pretty easily.
Correct. And so other examples could be is if you've got a customer or they're looking into their environment to take a look at VMs that have RDMs or that has CD-ROM mounted, or have there could be a one-liner that can go through and get that list, and voila, you have it in a text format that you can send over or that they can do something with, right? So there's a lot of configurations. There's a lot of things you can do beyond this, but the hope is that this is just the beginning of getting you guys demystified of REST API. At the end of the day, it's just, what do you want to do? You want to get, you want to post, and what path, what kind of results you get out of it.
Awesome.
I guess I was surprised when you powered on, powered off, and it's like an immediate, right, response. and it's also a little scary, I guess, in a sense, in that you deleted a VM. There was absolutely no, do you really want to delete this VM? You know what I mean? So it's just kind of a good reminder that automation and APIs are extremely powerful, but you also need to be careful and make sure you know what you're doing and have a staging, a dev, a test environment before you start releasing code into production, right?
Agreed. You guys tell me, everyone else, what's your thought? Is it easier for you to understand now that you've seen some examples, or is it still confusing? Do let me know.
I like the way you broke it out. I mean, I've done a lot of PowerShell, but I've not done REST APIs before, and this was very easy to kind of get my head around the concept. And I also like what you did with the token, the token string to make it easy to use.
Thank you.
Yeah, ditto. I mean, you hear a lot about APIs, but I'll be honest, I just never had a reason to use them. So seeing it in use for me is always helpful. It makes me understand it a lot more than reading about it. And then on that note, I have an API question from a customer that I emailed you. I hope you can help me out with.
Sure. I thought I saw someone sent a text or a chat.
No, that's just me. I'm just putting, there's a great packet pushers or a Datanauts podcast around RESTful APIs for infrastructure engineers. So it's great, great for our customers and whatnot.
Yeah, and there's a lot more out there. Once you understand the concept, when you go back to all those complex, documentation, you can just start looking through and get the tidbits that you really need. The rest of the stuff is really crap, right? Because for some reason, folks wants to overcomplicate REST API, and it's not, So for me, that's really all I want to show everyone. And the reason being because I didn't want to make this too overwhelming. I want to keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah, I love it. Really good stuff. I'm going to start playing around, I think. Anybody else got any other thoughts or comments or questions?
This is Jody. Sonny, do you have like a kind of a beginner's course that you could recommend for somebody, or some resources so they can get started on this? And I definitely see the power, and like Steve, like you said, with great power comes great responsibility. So I can see where it'd be a great tool to learn yourself as well as help your customers learn. And just wondering if there's like a couple of resources that you would recommend.
I don't have any because I made the mistake of going in, just jumping straight in and going through a lot. And I lost a lot of time doing that. Steve, Bill, do you have any recommendations on some of the documentations?
Well, I would always recommend YouTube, right? I can learn how to do anything on YouTube. So I'm sure there's some pretty good, just basic introduction to APIs, and not even the vSphere API, just APIs in general. I would think there'd be some good stuff there. We may even have some hands-on labs that cover like some automation stuff with VRO. I don't know if it gets into the API stuff, but
I just personally, I like the idea of coming up with just a test, a task that I want to do that seems attainable, right? So exactly what Sonny had here, right? Like I want to query something, I want to turn on a VM, turn it off. Okay, great. Like that gives you some different ways that you can hack away at it, and something that's not like you're boiling the ocean, right? I mean, like, I want to automate the teardown and rebuild of my whole lab. Like, good luck, right? Like that's just monumental. Why not just start with something a little smaller? So I usually just give myself something kind of goofy, just a couple things to do, and then the framework starts building itself out from there.
The other thing to consider is if you take a look at other applications and other REST APIs, you start seeing the trend of you know, what most application uses. And then that is an easier thing for you to pick up. And then you'll start to see the uniqueness of every applications and every developer and how they put the codes in. That's I mean, for a while I was just reading everybody's REST API, from simple ones to complex ones, you know. I hope that helps.
Hey, Sonny, I have a question.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I totally interrupted. Curious, what does it look like in the event log as you do some of these things like power on, power off? Is there anything, you know, when you go to vCenter and you look at recent tasks, to indicate that it came from an API call rather than through a GUI, or is it just what you would expect?
It is as if you were to click the button yourself. It doesn't know any better. It just knows that, so the REST API interface and the REST API response is as if you are, let's see.
Yeah, it's just an action, right? I guess it doesn't
Correct.
care where it came from.
Correct. I mean, the same kind of situations, if you were to ask about, you know, you ran it through PowerShell, did it know that it was through a PowerShell and not through a GUI? Not really.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Now, with that being said, I haven't gone deep into the logs to find out if it knows. Yeah, I'm sure if we learn enough, but most of the GUIs, most of the, like, for example, if you take a look at the recent tasks, you know, I forgot which one I turned on and which one I turned off.
I think you turned on 2, I think.
I think it's 2 or 3. So I got the reconfiguration. See, I got the event.
Maybe I'm wrong. Or maybe it was 1 and then you deleted it.
Hold on.
Oh yeah, there it is.
I know I didn't do this by hand. And it doesn't say much.
I'm just thinking, like, from an audit perspective, it would be cool to know not only who did what, but how they did it. You know what I mean?
So at least, so that's actually a good comment. Normally, for this example, I did administrator at vSphere Local. However, if we were to do this in production, if we were to recommend, you know, customers do this in production, perhaps using an account instead of, you know, administrator, use
Service account.
REST account or PowerShell account, because then at least we know, hey, who uses that account? Usually that's what that is. So at least you can itemize it that way. At least that's I think that's the easiest way to see real fast. But you're right, that is a concern.
What about the API as far as version to version of vSphere? Do you see a lot of changes? Or is it really probably just building new additional stuff, not deprecating old?
I have
API
to be honest.
stuff?
I find that since I started playing around since 6.5, 6.7 has a lot more variables, a lot more configurations, but compare them with most of the folks in the industry, vCenter has a limited amount of functionality within REST API. I'm hoping down the road that it does a lot more.
Now, I'll add one thing as you're looking across infrastructure providers, not just VMware, right? What they start doing is versioning their APIs. And so if you look at like the URL, you'll start seeing, you know, a numeric something in there, right? So maybe after a REST, it would say 2 or 3 or V2 or V3. And that's how you start seeing versions, right? So vendors will, you know, take it, for example, VMware. I have no idea if this is going to happen. But in the next version of vSphere, we might see a new version in there where it'd be REST/2. And the idea is they can start deprecating these old ones, right? So sometimes changing from version to version is just a new path, and then adjusting your code for it. Because it's hard, right? I mean, you know, we've seen with Windows, I think we talked about it last week, where the difference between an IP address, gathering an IP address versus Windows 7 and 10 is completely different. You don't want to just change the API from out from underneath people. You can add things, but you don't want to change the expected formats and things like that. So other vendors start versioning just based on essentially that URL, that path that you're querying.
You're absolutely right. And I've seen that. I think I've seen it in iDRAC, and I've seen it in a few others as well. But yeah, and the great thing about that is that the V1 that you're used to, that will always still be there. So that way, if you have code or you have customers with code, that will still function. However, as the newer version comes along, there'll be different variables or even more variables. So eventually there's got to be a cutoff time when you deprecate the old and go with the new. But the good thing is that it'll still exist, which is kind of cool because I don't recall, other application stacks doing that. Any other questions or comments?
Can we blow up your lab with a couple commands? Or do you need your lab? I thought it'd be kind of fun to destroy it.
I do need
like
my
one
lab
command.
I promised to show some examples of
oh, all right, fine.
Network configurations between distributed and standard, and I'm trying to do something.
Gotta use it. Would it help? I mean, since we only have a couple minutes left, I could share my screen real quick and just show. I mean, again, it's not even hitting a vSphere environment, but how to use PowerShell to do what you're doing. Get just a couple things there if anybody's interested.
Sure.
This is like super basic stuff. But
so I'll stop my sharing.
Cool, thank you. Let me just do this for whoever's left if you're interested. So here, in fact, let me just start at the basic. We saw curl that Sonny had, which is pretty cool. And I just have a PowerShell session open, and I can use the same curl command and go grab some files, some data, which is great. But as we saw earlier, it comes back and it's kind of useful. You get it, right? Like you get a sense of what's going on, but we can make it a little prettier. So let's make it prettier. There we go. Convert from JSON. So there's, we're taking this output and we use the pipe to take all of this output and then push it into another utility here called convert from JSON. It's just another commandlet. And now it looks a little better. We get rid of some of this other garbage that we don't really care about from the actual web request. And now it's a little better. And then we can, even from here, it's like, oh, all I care about is the image, the IMG, right? So none of this other stuff makes any sense to me. Doesn't really matter. So we'll just do select IMG. And again, this is just PowerShell, right? I'm not doing anything special here. Right, so now from running this one command, reaching out to xkcd, now I actually have the URL. And what I was doing, I was multitasking during the call or during the session, and I tried to say, well, what else could we do with this, right? So I assigned this to a variable, right? So now I can, right host xkcd. Right, so now you can actually see, oh, I did something with it. And what I was really hoping to get to was, let's see, where is that? Start process Chrome, right? And you can see up here, it launched it, but it was using this bad text, right? So I need to work on filtering that and stripping that out. But the idea here is just with curl, which we already saw in the lab, and PowerShell, which is not Mac, right? You can do the same thing and just start chaining it and pulling the information and doing something else with it. So, maybe instead of grabbing this file or this, going to xkcd, you could do something else with it. You could chain this number here and say, I want to pull any VM that has this in the name. I don't know. It's kind of silly why you would do it, but that's the point. Is once you can get the data into an environment that you kind of feel comfortable in, you can do a lot of really cool stuff. So
that's really That's really cool. I guess from my perspective, I always feel like it's difficult for me to get to this point because like I don't even know what I can and can't do. Like this convert from JSON commandlet that you use, I wouldn't know that that's even there. You know what I mean? So it's like the steep learning curve, I guess. You're right.
It can be.
It comes with time and experience.
Well, it comes with times, and it comes with, I think we're all very adept at researching things and whatever else. And so, yeah, you're going to come across a concept like, oh, this is called JSON, right? That's interesting, right? And so then you start learning, well, a lot of these REST APIs return things in JSON, so you got to figure out how to deal with it. So I just real quick, when I was trying to figure this out, like I've never done it here from PowerShell, and I said, all right, well, PowerShell REST JSON format or something like that in my search query, and sure enough, it says convert from JSON. Okay, cool. Let's give that a shot, right? So it's real iterative, and how I at least thought about it, like walking each step through. But yeah, I mean, there is a learning curve. I think the other part that I would add to it too is at least knowing that on the VMware side, darn near everything that we try and get our UIs to do, we're doing through the REST API, right? Which is what helps us use that developer center to capture our code. Right, because it's all just making API calls. So just it's kind of comforting knowing that almost everything that you can do in the UI, you can do from a REST API. So it gives you confidence that like, all right, this is doable. If I can go here and right click and deploy template, I can do it from an API. I just need to find out where that is.
Yeah, exactly. Now,
for me, I hope that someone within this presentation stack, someone who's listening in, I hope one day you have an opportunity to present to us, how you use REST API, in Horizon, VROPS, AWS. That way, at least we know that, you took the basic information that I did and you took it to the next level. And you helped us learn those bits as well. Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree. Anybody else got anything? All right, well, we'll let you guys go a little bit early here. Thanks so much, Sonny, for presenting. This has been very informative and gives me a lot of ideas around things that we can do. So thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for contributing.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Cool. Thanks.
Have a great rest of your week and a great weekend.
Bye, everyone.